Hello, everyone. My name is Francisco, and this is my presentation about fascinating aircraft from 1950 to 1980. I got a lot of the inspiration for these aircraft from an Instagrammer called Cessna Tour. I will put a link to his Instagram in the description at the end of the video. But here are the 5 aircraft that I thought were truly fascinating from this era and really showed how these are really some pioneers of aviation that just truly showed how creative and inventive people were back then, and safety regulations now prevent a lot of vehicles like this to be created nowadays. So the first one is the XB-70, the world's largest and fastest bomber ever built by the United States. The LTV L450F, it's a prototype quiet recon airplane. The XH-17 flying crane, the Frankenstein heavy lifting heli. Number 4, the Russian KM Ekranoplan. I'm not quite sure how it's pronounced. It's truly a beast of an airplane, but only sort of airplane-like. And number 5, the Sikorsky S-72 RSRA. Look, it's an airplane. It's a helicopter. Wait, it's both? You'll see. You'll see when we get there. The first airplane, the XB-70 Valkyrie. The backstory of this amazing bomber is that it was the largest and fastest bomber that was ever built by the US. The purpose behind this jet was to counter surface-to-air missiles. The US realized the effectiveness of surface-to-air missiles when a U-2 spy plane, which cruises at 400 miles an hour at 60,000 feet, was shot down over Russia. The US's plan to counter these missiles was to create an airplane that flies at 3 times the speed of sound to drop its payload over Russian territory while remaining unharmed if it would ever be necessary to do so. If we ever got into a war with Russia and had to fight in Russia. Some impressive specifications about the airplane is that it only took a crew of 2 people to man this 185-foot long jet that weighed 250,000 pounds empty and was capable of carrying an additional 300,000 pounds of fuel, which equals to about 46,000 gallons. It has a max speed of 3.1 times the speed of sound, or Mach 3, and that translates to about 2,300 miles per hour. And it was designed to have a payload of 50,000 pounds, but that never got put into testing. Here's a continuation of the XB-70. Here's a size comparison between a B-52, a B-1, and then an F-15. And then there's another photo of the rear shot of it. It had 6 jet engines all lined up next to each other, and it truly just looks sci-fi, and I love the look of it. The demise of the XB-70 was apparently the speeds of it were not enough to convince military officials that it was capable of going up against the air defenses of the Russians. Another reason for the downfall of this bomber is that it came at a time when ballistic missiles were deemed to be a more logical method of dealing with long-range opponents. And even though the president canceled using this jet as a bomber, the program for testing it continued for another 8 years from 1961 until 1969. Ultimately, the cost of this jet and its inability to be adapted for anything besides high-altitude bombing put an end to this airplane's career. Next on the list is the LTV L450F. This airframe was not originally an airplane airframe, and it certainly was not originally planned to have a turboprop engine strapped to the front of it. At one point, this airplane was actually a Schweitzer 232 glider, which was designed to carry 3 people, but now only carries a pilot. This version of the glider had stronger spars, thicker skin, and sturdier landing gear. The reason behind the creation of this machine was to serve as a quiet reconnaissance aircraft during the Vietnam War. Some impressive specifications is that it could hold 380 gallons of fuel, which gave it a range of about 6,000 miles, and it had endurance of over a day with a ceiling of 52,000 feet. Continuing, the demise of this amazing glider was that it was destroyed during its third flight. The first prototype was. The second prototype was constructed and flown successfully, completing all of the tests that were given to it. A third prototype was then built called the XQM-93, which was a drone. 4 examples of this drone were built for the United States Air Force, but they must have not been too impressed with it because the project was canceled shortly after those examples were built. The Hughes XT-17 flying crane. This is an amazing machine. I mean, all of these are, but this thing truly gets me. This helicopter was designed to be a heavy lift rotorcraft that could carry over 33,000 pounds. This aircraft was made from other aircraft parts to speed up the process of construction. Parts included were the front wheels from a B-25 and the rear wheels from a cargo plane, fuel tanks created from the bomb bay of a B-29, the cockpit from a military glider, and the tail section from a Sikorsky helicopter. Some truly impressive specifications is that it was powered by 2 turbojet engines that sent thrust out the back of the jet engines, but also to the tips of the rotors, which were hollowed out to assist in them spinning. It had a staggering range of 40 miles, staggering for the wrong reasons, and a massive rotor diameter of 129 feet. Its demise. The project had a short lifespan of only 3 years, from 1952 to 1955. In the end, Hughes decided that it was too impractical and scrapped the idea, but to this day, it holds the record for the largest flying rotorcraft. There was a derivative of the XH-17 flying crane called the XH-28, which was planned to double the carrying capacity of the XH-17. Actually, I think it was triple to about 100,000 pounds, but it never got past the modeling stage, as you can see in the top right photo. But in the bottom photo, you can see just the sheer scale of this thing. It was massive. Speaking of large aircraft, the Russian KM Ekranoplan, nicknamed the Caspian Sea Monster. The backstory for this was the Americans first knew of its existence when they spotted a large vehicle navigating over the water in Russia with short wings, and they noticed it from their satellites because they were too scared to fly into their territory anymore. The Ekranoplan was used for things like transporting troops, vehicles, equipment, and supplies, and there was even one variant that was capable of launching guided missiles off of the back, and you'll see that in the next slide. The way the Ekranoplan worked was by using ground effect to travel over sea waters at very low altitudes. Ground effect is when there is a cushion of air between the wings and the surface below, which provides more lift than if it were to be higher up in altitude. Some impressive specifications were that it had a max altitude of 66 feet, a top speed of 460 miles an hour, and stall speed, and it stalls at 210 miles an hour, which I'm curious of what the stall characteristics would be at 66 feet above the water. It had 10 jet engines and 2 on the tail, with 8 up on the fuselage, so a total of 10. It had an empty weight of 840,000 pounds and a max weight of 1.1 million pounds. It was estimated that the Ekranoplan could carry about 60,000 gallons of fuel. Its demise. It is believed that about 8 of these Ekranoplans were produced. The reasoning behind the Soviets no longer using this vehicle is unknown to the US, but I personally suspect that the technology simply became irrelevant and that they no longer had a use for it. This vehicle has rightfully earned its name as a sea monster and is currently the 2nd largest aircraft ever produced. And lastly on our list, we have the Sikorsky S-72 RSRA. The backstory for this unique aircraft is that RSRA stands for Rotor Systems Research Aircraft. The project was started in 1970 with its first flight happening in 1976. According to helis.com, the RSRA allows testing of new rotor concepts at speeds at up to 300 knots. It can fly like a helicopter with wings and a jet, or as a fixed-wing rotorcraft without a rotor. The aircraft was designed to test the effects of stopping the rotors in flight, and it was also meant to take off, similar to a helicopter, then transition to airplane-like flight using the small wings and propulsion from the two side-mounted jet engines. The most impressive thing about this vehicle is that it incorporates a certified helicopter ejection system where the blades would be severed by like tiny little I watched the video and it looks like miniature explosions, but then the blades are thrown away from the helicopter, and then each pilot is ejected one right after another. I really recommend looking up the video on this. It's crazy. And the demise. This project lasted longer than any other aircraft mentioned on this list, going from 1970 until 1988. The versions of the S-72 that were presented on the previous slide never flew, and they were the last versions of the S-72 to be created before the project cancellation. The latest X-wing rotor blade technology was meant to allow the S-72 to fly without the rotor spinning, but testing never got this far. And going back to the previous slide, you can see that the rotor is shaped like an X, and it's not blade-like or as sharp as other helicopter blades. Like right here, the examples seen on the right are the only versions to actually fly. So either you have the options of having the blade spinning like a conventional helicopter, or just not having the main rotor blades at all and only flying off of the main wing. And that concludes my presentation. Here are the sources that I use, and thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did while I was creating it.